Just a helpful hint, these are conversations between adults intended for adults. There is the potential for some adult subject matter or adult language.
Hello. This is Danielle Ireland, and you are listening to Don't Cut Your Own Bangs, a solo cast. Today, my lovely friends, we are talking about pleasure. Pleasure. There's a lot of different ways we can interpret pleasure. I'll say that the primary intent is to help, mainly in my work with clients, talking about pleasure in many aspects of our life so that one can access more pleasure or a greater sense of pleasure when it comes to sexual intimacy. I will preface, though, that this is not a podcast on sex specifically. This is not about giving sex tips. I am not a sex therapist. But sex and sexuality and sexual intimacy within couples are areas and topic areas that I talk about a lot with clients. I do a lot of work in this area. And so we're not talking about sex, but we kind of are talking about sex. Gosh, it even makes me think, I don't remember who said it. There's some quote, and I'm not even quoting it correctly, but it's like everything is sex. Everything is sex. It probably feels like a marketing, like something some marketer quoted. Maybe it's even from Mad Men. I don't know. But yeah, we do tend to go to sex a lot. Sex is thrust in our face a lot. We are born with bodies with genitals, and those genitals serve a function. And those functions are not just biological, they are also for pleasure. We're one of the few creatures on Earth that has been known to have sex for pleasure. But also, you can have pleasure in so many ways beyond just sex. So today we are talking about pleasure. It is a sexy episode. I'll say a mature episode. With that in mind, listen with caution. If you're listening with other little ears around, maybe put your headphones on, or maybe just listen at another time. But we're not talking about in-depth sex acts or detail, so there's no need for concern. There's no need for a trigger warning. It's not going to be a heavy episode. My hope is that this episode feels like a decadent, rich, lovely dessert that you savor at the end of a perfect meal. That's the hope. So before we dive into the meat, I just want to give you guys an update that I finished a book. I finished Spare, Prince Harry's Spare. I thought it was really good. I know that there's been a lot of talk in the media about one particular part of the book. If those of you who don't know or haven't heard, he references getting frostbitten on his penis. That's actually a very small part of the book, but it seems to be all the media's focused on. And I think anytime you take one thing out of context, particularly like a vulnerable moment that someone is sharing and kind of exploit it and blow it up, it just kind of feels, I don't know, it feels kind of icky. It's like someone who's actually read the book. If you've read the book and you don't like that part, great. You have that opinion. But I think a lot of people are hyper-focusing on that one component and they haven't read it. So I'm a little like, taking, I don't know, context. Thought it was good. I'm loving reading for pleasure. It's fabulous. I read my vampire smutty book. Super fun. It was just kind of like eating Pringles. It's like, oh, I'm not full. I'm not like satiated, but that was tasty. It was fun. And I'm making great progress on my other headier, more therapy work-related books. Those are still going great. Dr. Becky's Good Inside, Natasha Hersey's The Nap Ministry, and Gabor Mate's The Myth of Normal. All fabulous reads. Can't recommend them highly enough. And then my other addition for pleasure, I'm listening to Colin Jost, A Very Punchable Face. I'm a big fan of Saturday Night Live, and I like hearing about the backstory of how things come together. And I just love memoirs. I love learning about people. That's probably why I do this work. I find it I just find it interesting. I think people are fascinating, endlessly fascinating. And as much as I love fiction, I think someone's actual lived experience, it's really gripping and compelling. So great progress there. I hope that if reading was something that you decided to make time and space for so far this year, that you're making good progress too. Oh, and. Okay. So I talk about self-care a lot. I talk about honoring yourself a lot. With all that said, my friends, I am taking a couple weeks off of the podcast, but that doesn't mean that there won't be episodes sent out into the podcast etherwebs and into your phone if you're wanting to keep current on content. We're going to be reposting 2 episodes. So one episode is going to be 2 blondes and a Brazilian. This is one of my favorite episodes of all time. It's a personal favorite because there's just a lot of personal anecdotes. It's one of the few interviews I've done where I'm actually interviewing 2 people. So a dear friend of mine, Marie, who is from Sao Paulo, Brazil, and then another dear friend of mine, Sarah Kleinknecht, who is, she now lives in Hollywood. But yeah, we had a visit together a few years ago. And if you're wanting an episode that's really giggly and full of laughs and full of hilarious stories, probably my favorite Don't Cut Your Own Bang story of all time is Sarah's at the end, and it involves Family Guy creator Seth MacFarlane. So I'm just going to leave that little Easter egg for you there. Please check it out. It's so fun. If you just want a good laugh and just, I don't know, belief in humanity and friendship. And I have to give my mom credit because she said that she recently re-listened to it at the gym and was laughing so hard she was crying on a workout machine. So thanks, Mom. Thanks for the recommendation. And then the other is, the other re-release is going to be what your desire could be telling you. And I thought that that one would really be a nice, it kind of dovetails nicely off of the topic we're going to be focusing on today. So we're going to be focusing on pleasure, getting something light and sweet, because so much pleasure can be found in friendship, companionship, right? It's deeper than the bedroom, although it certainly can be fun there too. And then what your desire could be telling you. So those 2 episodes are going to be released over the next 2 weeks, and then I'll be back with you for a new episode on Monday, March 13th.
We'll be back to the show after this short break.
If you've tried journaling before and you want to add a little bit more zhuzh, get a little bit more depth into your journaling practice, well, friends, I have just the thing for you. The Treasured Journal and Meditation Series bundle is a fabulous support to a journal practice that you already love. The meditation series cover the 7 themes in the Treasured Journal. These themes, they cover the gamut. Every topic that's ever come up with clients in therapy is in one of these buckets. The meditation series helps slow your mind down, brings feelings to the surface so that you can then turn to your journal and really get into it. It's fun, it's light, and it's meaningful. Think of it like floating down a river. It's like the best river flow, lazy river experience ever. And you also learn something new about yourself. It's easy, you're supported. So before you do anything else, go to the show notes, click on the link for the Treasured Journal, and grab a copy of the Treasured Journal and Meditation Series bundle today.
And now back to the show.
So why are we talking about pleasure? Pleasure is an essential part of what it means to be human and what it means to be alive. When clients start coming to work with me for therapy, it can be presented in a lot of different ways, but the simplest way to characterize what they're looking for is the elimination of pain. I'm in pain in my life and I don't want to be in pain. I'm in pain in this relationship and I don't want to be in pain in this relationship. Well, the absence of pain is not pleasure, right? The absence of pain is maybe neutral at best. But who wants to live a life full of neutrality? We talk a lot about pain management, resilience. We talk a lot about the hard things, but it is so, I think, vital and necessary to remember that we are alive. And one of the beautiful gifts of being alive is that we get to experience pleasure. Now, what can make pleasure kind of maybe an elusive, challenging concept to kind of wrap your head around or kind of get your hand on? It's like, well, okay, what does it mean? What stands in the way? You know, it sounds great. I'd love more of this. Amazing. But where do we find it? How do we find it? And so a lot of what gets in the way, first and foremost, is safety. if we're not feeling safe, we're not going to be able to access pleasure. That's just like bottom tier, bottom rung of the pyramid. So this conversation, or this particular conversation about pleasure that I'm having right now, is with the assumption that one is sitting in a place where they feel safe enough to explore this. It will just feel, not that it's not worth, I'm not saying it's not worth listening to, but if, like for clients, for example, who are actively in abusive relationships or are really working through some heavy trauma, we have to, just like tending to a garden, it's like we have to pull the debris, the rocks, we have to churn the soil, we have to fertilize it. There's so much digging down into before the ground is ready for growth, ready for life. And pleasure is, you can think of it like planting a seed for growth in life. So assuming that one is in a place in their life, whether that's in a relationship or not, you certainly do not have to be in a relationship to access pleasure, or even sexual pleasure for that matter. Someone can have a lot of fun with just they, themselves, and I. I don't know if that made sense, but I think you follow what I'm saying. But assuming that one is in a position to be safe, then we're left with, and this is often a place I get with clients that I have the great fortune of having enough time to work with them to where the progress is made, and for the initial reason that brought them in, they've now made progress where it's like, okay, now what? Now what are we going to do? Now what are we going to talk about? And this is for me, selfishly, this is very selfish, but selfishly, I'm like, oh my God, yes, this is where the fun begins. In my humble opinion, I think this is where the real work begins, because, okay, we've rewritten, rewired, we've cleared the clutter, right? We've sifted, we've sorted, we've figured out what actually is true for you. What do you want to keep? What do you want to let go of? And now here you stand. And now what? And that can be equal parts amazing and terrifying. Now what? What do you mean? There's more work I have to do? I just did all that shit back there. And now there's this new step. I have to discover pleasure. Whew. So it's kinda. Yeah, kinda. Here we are. So it's hard because for most of us, and when I say us, I'm including anyone who identifies as a woman, right? We spend so much of our life and energy, and this is so encultured, indoctrinated, just baked into how we raise women and girls and those who identify as women and girls, to be caretakers and nurturers. We pour out, we pour out, we pour out, we pour out. And so when that is, in so many cases, the measure and mark of what it means to be, I'm using air quotes here, doing your job well, when someone asks you, what do you want to do? What would feel good to you? Think about that for a second. It's not just, what do you want to eat? It's not just, what needs to happen, because I guarantee there is an internal monitor that I can't even tell you how many women that I know personally, and I know extends beyond just my own awareness and experience of monitoring, vet appointments, kid appointments, crackers that need to be bought, grocery orders, birthdays coming up, like freaking gift bags for like all of the little shit that if it wasn't held in our minds would go, it would just not, it just wouldn't happen. It wouldn't exist. And so to turn off the managerial mind and redirect that to pleasure and play is not an easy thing to do. And it's not easy because we have so much momentum and practice taking care of, caretaking, whatever word we want to call it, mothering, although it's certainly not just mothers at all. It's not mothers at all. Not only mothers, but it certainly includes them. This focus and this shift and redirecting to me, you, what do you want? It's rewiring a practiced habit in our brain. And this is just talking about like neurobiology for a moment. When we practice thoughts over and over and over again, That's also how we form beliefs, right? Beliefs are just a thought that we really, really, really think really, really, really hard many times. That's essentially what a belief is. But when we practice certain thought forms and it moves us into act and behave in particular ways, that thought practiced over and over, reinforced with what we're actually doing with our bodies, how our body is responding to what we're thinking, that creates a neural pathway in your brain that, for those listening who are actual scientists, send me a message, send me a DM, send me an email with more correct science if you would like me to add to this. But essentially, some of your neural pathways are like barely treaded hiking trails. Some of your neural pathways are like the Lincoln Tunnel. They are solid, brightly lit, clearly enforced, and it's very easy to get to point A to point B. So essentially, the thoughts that you think over and over again that activate the things that you do are easier and easier and easier to do, like unconscious behavior versus conscious behavior. When you're learning something new, you have to be consciously participating. Like imagine learning to drive, or not imagine, just remember learning to drive for the first time. I have a client whose daughter is learning to drive right now, which is insane because this particular young woman was a child when I met her, and now she's driving. That is insanity. But anyway, remember what it felt like learning to drive. How every single thing you did, you really had to be on your P's and Q's. You were so aware of every signal, every mirror you needed to check. And now, I'm not saying this is a good thing, but if we're being honest with ourselves, there's a lot of multitasking that's probably happening in the car right now. We're drinking a beverage. If you're like me, it's always two. It's always a tea and a coffee and a water. Sometimes it's a tea, a coffee, and a water, and a smoothie, and a, right? So we've got our beverages we're managing. If you've got kiddos, you're wrangling, and their snacks, and their things, and their entertainment, and their songs. We're changing the radio. We're maybe audio responding to a text message, or making a phone call. Like we're doing a lot of things, which means that all of the activity that had to be focused on actually operating our car has become its own Lincoln Tunnel. It has to be less conscious, and it can be a little bit more unconscious. To bring it back to pleasure, when we are just moving through our daily lives, servicing, managing, raising, surviving, what we are losing sight of is something that is so innate in us when we first come into the world. Because the only sensations we know are pleasure and pain, right? We respond to discomfort. That is a lesser degree of pain, but it can still count as pain. And then we know the comfort and pleasure of touch and being held or being fed, being responded to, being talked to sweetly. Those instincts that are there the second we are born, they don't go away, but they can be overwritten and they can be forgotten. So, how do we get reacquainted, in touch with pleasure? Because one can imagine, right? I talked a little bit about how I'm not directly talking about sex, but you could certainly see how understandable it is that when we get caught in the momentum of life, the going and the doing and the being and the performing and the taking care of and all of those things, that when our partner is next to us or we have an opportunity to be next to someone, all of that momentum is moving in a different direction than connection, intimacy, touch, relaxation, sensation. It's a very different mindset. It's a completely different energy. So one of the simplest ways, and I'm just offering one because, right, this is a large topic. We could bite into it and explore it in a lot of different ways. I'm happy to answer questions about it too back on the podcast. So if you're listening and you're like, yeah, but what about this? Or what about this? Tell me more about that. I'm happy to do it. But I just wanted to keep it simple for today. One of the easiest ways, and you can do this multiple times a day, what I recommend you doing is actually putting an alert in your phone so that it will ping at a particular time of the day. So you don't have to worry about remembering. It doesn't have to be another thing you're managing, because if pleasure becomes something you're managing, it probably isn't pleasure. It depends on your personality, but that's just a hunch. So the question to ask yourself, and you can even do this right now, right this very red hot minute. What do you really, really, and I underline those second really, 2 reallys are important. What do you really, really want right now? Not what do you need, not what do you have to do, not what's next on your to-do list. What do you really, really want right now? And then let whatever the answer is come. Let it come. There was a time in my life where the answer to that question was a hot chocolate. I didn't know why. I didn't have a good rhyme or reason, but I'll tell you that, and I've shared this story in different ways in this podcast before, but if you're new to the podcast, I'll just kind of skip to the end and say that letting myself acknowledge the desire for the pleasure of a hot chocolate actually helped me get in touch with some deeper feelings that were brushing up against a season of depression that I didn't know or didn't recognize at the time. Like, pleasure can not only bring intimacy in relationships and be so incredibly great for your brain and body, but it can also save you. It can, for me, it prevented maybe being in a deeper, darker funk longer because I just didn't even see it for what it was. It took giving myself permission to acknowledge what would pleasure be for me right now and then acting on it. That's sort of like the step 1A. The one is, what do you really, really want right now? Step 1A is, and then do it. The action is incredibly necessary for this particular exercise. So when I had a break in my day when I could go get it, I went and I got it. I asked a client the other day who's also trying to get in touch with not just pleasure, but what she actually wants. And her answer was also very similar. And it's usually, it doesn't have to be, but it's usually something very simple. Like, oh, I want a nap. Or I want, again, to read something for pleasure. I want to just walk through the mall and window shop and not buy anything, but just touch everything. I want to eat a croissant. It's usually something incredibly small, but it takes actually considering the question to find out whatever that thing is for you. And if you're really stuck, if you're really, really, really stuck, then what I might encourage you to do, you can think of this as like a second step, or like a choose your own adventure. If one isn't really working for you, maybe try this. Think of one of the last memories you have of however you would characterize pleasure. What's one of the last memories you had of pleasure? What were you doing? Who were you with? Let your mind kind of run wild. Let yourself daydream. And really let yourself paint that picture, and almost to the point where your body is re-experiencing the sensation of that memory. And then see if there's a tiny component that you can bring in to your life. So an example of that for me would be last April, my husband and we took our daughter to Italy. And that trip was a big trip. And if I were to ask myself, what do I really, really want right now? If my answer happened to be, oh, I want to go to Italy and eat pasta. Okay, great. We're not trying to argue how attainable or achievable or realistic the thing is. That was an incredible trip we had. That's not something I'm going to necessarily get to do every day. And that's not necessarily going to work for me right now in this red hot minute. But you know what could? Pasta. Pasta is very possible. Maybe I want to make it myself, or maybe I want a stranger to make it, deliver it to me, and then I can throw my trash away and not have to do a single dish, right? It's like whatever's pleasurable to you. Sometimes it's cooking. Sometimes it's having someone else cook for you. It's, again, choose your own adventure. But that is the exercise for tapping into pleasure. And I wanted to offer one last little love note, and it's on this theme of pleasure. So I don't think I've talked about this yet on the podcast, but I joined a writer's circle. I'm almost positive that's what it's called. I joined a writer's circle at the beginning of this year. Someone that I really admire and look up to, who's an author, just posted out on social media, hi, I'm doing a writer's circle and it costs this amount. And this is when we're meeting once a month for 6 months. And this is what it means. And there was just something in me that leapt up and just said, yes, I'm going to do this. I didn't question it. I didn't overthink it. I just signed up and said yes, which is really not like me at all. I wasn't able to make the first one in person. The second one I was able to make in person. And there was a writing prompt. And this is all creative writing. It's not for journaling. It's not necessarily, it can kind of be for journaling, but it's to unlock creativity and storytelling. And I was looking for a creative outlet that didn't feel related to work. So one of the prompts in this writer circle, we had 5 minutes to answer or respond to a prompt. And I'm going to share the prompt with you in case you feel inspired to try a little bit of this yourself. And I want to give credit. So the creator of the circle that I'm in, her name is Betsy Murphy. You can find her on Instagram. That's where I found her, but she's probably also on Facebook. She may also be on LinkedIn. I don't know if she's on TikTok, but Betsy Murphy. I'll be sure to link her Instagram profile in the show notes. If you want to follow along, check out her writing prompts. She's incredible. But I wanted to share the prompt and then also share what came from it. Because for me, this is when I get to be creative and expressive, it's one of the most pleasurable, freeing, loving things I ever do for myself. Yeah, so I just thought I would share this gift with you. So the prompt is, tell about a love story that ended too soon. So that's your prompt. If you want to try it, tell me about a love story that ended too soon. And here was my response. She was fearless. She was an artist. She was bold, take no prisoners, take charge, take no shit kind of kid. She was me. My inner child, before the world told her who to be, before she learned what earned approval and created distance, before boys grabbed her, and before she learned the rules of good girls and Disney princesses, she was free. She's my hero. She's my compass. She's the truest part of me. She's also more patient than I am. Sitting beside my grandmother, she waits for me to come home. Skipping rocks, standing naked, she is safe inside herself. She is home and ready to say, welcome back. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Don't Cut Your Own Bangs. I hope that it was pleasurable for you, as it certainly was for me. As always, your time, your care, and your attention and presence here mean more to me than you know. Please remember, before you click off, to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. It helps so much in the algorithm interwebs, and I hope that you continue to have a fabulous day.